Neighbors, put the kettle on and pull up a chair, because the storm we have all been predicting, the storm we have been watching brew on the horizon for years, has finally made landfall, and it is shaking the very foundations of the House of Windsor, and more importantly, rattling the beige walls of that Montecito mansion. We are talking about the moment the jet touched down on the tarmac at Heathrow. And the whispers didn't just begin. They exploded into a deafening roar that has royal watchers, insiders, and frankly all of us sensible people absolutely reeling. Not because Prince Harry was scheduled to arrive, not because anyone expected him back in the UK, and certainly not because he'd announced anything through his usual channels of leaks and PR spin. The reason the airport staff froze, the reason the cameras swung around like weather vanes in a hurricane, was simple and terrifyingly clear. Harry wasn't supposed to be here, not this week, not like this, hood up, shoulders tense, moving with the urgent, clipped pace of a man who has just received the phone call he spent his entire post-royal life dreading. Now I know you guys are excited for more, but before we delve into further discussion, if you haven't subscribed, come on guys, what are you waiting for? Hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell ASAP. So now, why was the Prince of Panic scurrying across the tarmac like a fugitive? Well, that is where this story takes a sharp turn straight into the chaos that the evil mastermind in California has orchestrated, but can no longer control. The rumor mill had already been churning for days, hinting at something seismic happening behind palace walls. People close to the royal household were dropping hints, cryptic lines like, "Something big is coming," or "Watch the titles." That's all they would say, just enough to set the hair on the back of your neck on end. And you know how royal watchers are, especially us. Give us one breadcrumb, and suddenly there's an entire loaf floating around the internet. But then it escalated. A leak, a whisper, a message passed from one insider to another, until it reached the press in the form of a four-word bombshell that we have been waiting for. Secret strip order drafted. That is when everything detonated. In the tabloids, on social media, on talk shows, everywhere, people were asking the same question. Strip what? Strip who? And why in secret? Some claimed it was about security privileges, which we know Harry is obsessed with. But the smarter money, the people who really know how Prince William and King Charles operate, suggested something bigger, something unprecedented. The palace said nothing, not a word, not a blink. Radio silence so loud it practically echoed down the mall. And then Harry's plane appeared, confirming our deepest suspicions that the endgame is finally here. We have heard for months that palace officials have been trying their hardest to strip Harry and his wife of their titles, to finally cut the cord that allows them to monetize the monarchy while trashing it from a safe distance. But the sticking point has always been the king, the loving father who couldn't quite bring himself to do it. But the rumors coming out today suggest a massive shift. The whisper is that Charles has finally looked at the evidence, looked at the damage, and said, "I agree." So we are in total agreement. They are very dependent on those titles, aren't they? The Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Without those words before their names, who are they? A retired actress and a man who used to be a prince. That is why the panic is setting in. From the moment Harry stepped off that plane, speculation turned into a full-blown hurricane because Harry has kept a very deliberate distance from the UK ever since stepping down from royal duties. He has treated London like a city made of landmines. Every appearance is calculated, every visit short, every departure immediate. But this time was different. There was no charity event, no Invictus engagement, no legal hearing that forced his hand. This was personal, and anyone watching him walk briskly across that tarmac could tell something had rattled him to his core. People online began putting two and two together immediately. What if the alleged strip order was about his remaining royal privileges? What if the palace had finally decided to move forward on consequences long whispered about but never acted on? And if that was true, why now? Why suddenly? Why quietly? It feels like the patience of the Prince of Wales, our future King William, has finally snapped. We know William is the enforcer. We know he is the one who looks at the polls, who sees the damage Meghan and Harry do every time they open their mouths, and he is the one saying, "Enough." Meanwhile, the palace wasn't helping themselves. Instead of denying the rumor, they did what they always do when there's trouble brewing. They tightened the circle and refused to comment. You could almost imagine the thick stone walls of Buckingham Palace leaning in, holding on to their secrets with both hands, protecting the institution from the duo who have tried to burn it down. The New York Post is reporting that locals in the UK say enough is enough, especially after Prince Harry's disastrous interviews and the constant victim narrative. But not everyone inside was so careful. Word began slipping out from those who always talk off the record. They said there had been a meeting, a tense one, senior courtiers, top advisors, and a couple of very familiar royal figures behind closed doors, discussing the next phase of distancing the monarchy from the Sussex drama. The phrase alone sent commentators into overdrive. Next phase, as in there were phases, plural. And so the theory solidified. Harry wasn't rushing back because he wanted to be there. He was rushing back because he had to be. As he exited the terminal, trying to slip past cameras that were absolutely determined not to let him vanish into the London fog, you could see it in his eyes. Something had gone terribly wrong. A man doesn't jump on a transatlantic flight at a moment's notice unless someone somewhere pulled a very serious alarm. Meanwhile, in Montecito, the atmosphere was reportedly tense, and frankly, I would pay good money to be a fly on the wall in that Olive Garden right now. Meghan had been spotted leaving the house hours before the news broke, looking frantic, but by the time the media caught wind of Harry's flight, she had gone dark. No statements, no comments, no smiles, no paparazzi walks in parking lots, just silence. And for a couple normally so tightly choreographed, so media-aware, silence speaks volumes. It screams that she has lost control of the narrative. Royal commentators immediately split into two camps. One group speculated that the palace had officially begun the process of removing Harry and Meghan's remaining titles, Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The other group insisted it was about something far more urgent, their children's royal titles. And that possibility, that is what lit social media on fire. Users were posting theories by the thousands, screenshots, old interviews, body language analyses, side-by-side comparisons of past statements. But here's the part that made the whole world sit up straighter. Insiders claimed the alleged strip order was not unanimous, that there were disagreements inside the family, but that the nuclear option was firmly on the table. And let's be honest, neighbors, it is about time. We love King Charles. We do. But his soft spot for his darling boy has allowed this circus to go on for too long. But if the rumors are true that Charles has finally said I agree to the necessity of stripping the titles, then Harry and Meghan are truly finished. Their entire brand, their American Riviera Orchard nonsense, their Netflix deals, it all hinges on that royal connection. Without it, they are just Harry and Meghan, two people who complained their way out of a palace. All this chaos unfolds against the backdrop of Harry's arrival. As he stepped into a waiting black vehicle with tinted windows so thick they might as well have been painted on, the city felt charged. Londoners who happened to be nearby were already texting, tweeting, live streaming, and the moment the car pulled away, you could practically hear reporters sprinting to catch up. For the rest of the day, the question hovered like a storm cloud. Would Harry go straight to the palace? Would he meet privately with the king? Would he attempt to negotiate, or was he here to fight? Every outlet had a theory, but none had confirmation. That's what made the silence so loud. Because when a royal returns unexpectedly, when the palace refuses to comment, when insiders start whispering about secret orders, it only means one thing. Something major is happening behind the scenes. And this, whatever it is just the beginning. By the time Harry's car slipped into London traffic, speculation had turned into a frenzy. The hashtag #ShagStripOrder had exploded within minutes. Some insisted Harry had come to demand answers, playing the victim again. Others said he'd flown in to stop something already in motion. And then there were the people who suggested he hadn't even known what was happening until the last second, implying someone inside the palace had deliberately kept him in the dark until the ink was dry. If that were true, that would explain the panic. That would explain the rush. That would explain everything etched into his face at the airport. He is realizing that he is no longer inside the tent. He is out in the cold, and the locks are being changed. Meanwhile, palace courtiers were doing their usual dance, avoiding eye contact, speaking softly, disappearing into side corridors whenever journalists got too close. But even though they weren't speaking publicly, they were definitely speaking privately. And that's how yet another rumor slipped out that the king had been advised to act sooner rather than later. Sooner for what exactly? That's what nobody could say with certainty, but the phrasing alone, deliberate, ominous, made everyone lean in a little closer. Royal watchers began digging through every legal nuance involving titles. Some argued that because Harry and Meghan stepped back, their ducal titles could technically be removed by Parliament if enough pressure built. Others reminded everyone that taking away titles would be unprecedented for modern royals, though not impossible. And then came the nudge that pushed everything further. Reports that Prince William had been presenting long-term stability concerns during high-level discussions. That phrase, repeated in every newspaper like a warning beacon, long-term stability. That is William's code. That is the future king saying, I am protecting my legacy, I am protecting Catherine, and I am protecting my children from this toxicity. According to several insiders, William believed the monarchy couldn't continue absorbing hit after hit, not from the public, not from the press, not from political critics, and still function properly. He needed clarity. He needed boundaries. And apparently, so the rumor goes, he was pushing for those boundaries to be enforced. Prince William is planning to strip Harry and Meghan of their royal titles, effectively, or at least marginalize them so completely that the titles become meaningless. And when William pushes, courtiers listen. That's about when the narrative shifted from curiosity to alarm for the Sussex squad. Commentators started saying openly what had only been whispered before, that William had become the family's anchor, strategist, and future planner, and that he was no longer willing to let the Sussex drama overshadow the monarchy's next era. But here's where things got even more interesting. Another leak suggested that the secret strip order wasn't just one document. It was a set of contingencies. Multiple drafts, multiple versions, multiple options. Each one addressing a different outcome depending on Harry and Meghan's behavior going forward. In other words, the palace was preparing for everything. That's the part that made people gasp. That's the part that kept royal analysts glued to their screens. That's the part that made Harry's sudden arrival look less like a visit and more like a crisis response to save his only asset. Meanwhile, back in Montecito, things weren't much calmer. Meghan had reportedly instructed her team to prepare statements for every possible scenario, which only fueled theories that she expected something major to drop. Some said she was preparing for legal action. Others said she was preparing for public relations warfare, which is her specialty. A few insisted she was preparing for both. But what really sent shockwaves through social media was the rumor that Meghan had reacted with complete disbelief and fury at the idea that the palace could take action without informing her. The audacity, as if she is owed a consultation after everything she has done. That rumor led to the obvious question, did Harry even know before today? Because if Meghan was blindsided, then Harry might have been too. And that possibility made everything feel even more dramatic. Think about it. What would it mean if Harry learned about a threat to his family's royal titles, not from the palace, not from family, but from someone outside the circle? It would explain why he moved so quickly. It would explain why he arrived alone. It would explain why he was visibly shaken. He is realizing that his father's darling boy status might not protect him from the consequences of his betrayal anymore. Then came the next twist. Another insider hinted that the palace's concern wasn't only about titles, it was also about precedence, protocol, and representation. Essentially, they were worried that the Sussexes were still benefiting from royal association while openly criticizing the institution. In simple terms, they wanted to stop the contradictions. And as those whispers spread across news outlets, royal historians started chiming in. They began pointing out examples from the past, moments when royals who acted against the crown's interest were quietly sidelined or had their privileges removed. And that historical context made people realize something. If the palace wanted to strip titles, they absolutely had precedent to lean on. But the part that tugged at people's attention, the part that made even neutral observers perk up, was the mention of Harry's children. Archie and Lilibet's princely status had always been a source of debate, but removing it, that would be enormous. That would be global news. And that's what everyone feared the palace might be contemplating. By midday, royal analysts were pointing out how unusual it was that King Charles hadn't been seen, hadn't commented, hadn't released a statement. His absence only strengthened the theory that something big was being handled behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Harry's movements became the subject of minute-by-minute tracking. Some believed he went straight to Clarence House. Others claimed he headed to Windsor. A source said that Harry had requested a private meeting with his father immediately, and that in response courtiers scrambled to adjust the king's schedule. The wording was vague, but the implication wasn't. Whatever Harry wanted to discuss couldn't wait. By early evening, commentators began pointing out something they'd been tiptoeing around all day. Harry looked like a man who'd been pushed to his limit. A man overwhelmed, a man exhausted, a man who couldn't believe the situation had spiraled this far. And honestly, neighbors, part of you almost feels sorry for him. Almost. Until you remember the pain he caused his grandmother in her final years, the stress he put on his father, the attacks on Catherine. Then you realize that this is simply the consequences of his own actions coming home to roost. As the sun began to set over London, the atmosphere grew even heavier. Buckingham Palace remained silent. Kensington Palace remained silent. Sussex representatives remained silent. Everyone was holding their breath. Royal watchers were reading meaning into everything. Some believed the King and Harry were meeting right then. Some believed William was involved, standing firm like the rock he is. Some believed Meghan was frantically calling Harry from Montecito, screaming down the phone line. Some believed the strip order had already been signed. Nobody knew. Everybody speculated. That's when the final rumor of the night dropped. One that sent shockwaves so big they practically shook the internet. A source claimed the palace was planning to make an announcement. Not immediately, not tonight, but soon. Very soon. An announcement that would clarify the monarchy's position moving forward. Those few words ignited every corner of royal media because palace announcements never come lightly, and when they come after a day like this, they usually come with consequences. By the end of the night, one thing had become clear. Something had shifted. Something big. Something irreversible. Harry hadn't come back voluntarily. The palace wasn't sitting quietly, and whatever happens next is going to change the royal landscape in a way we haven't seen in decades. So, neighbors, what do you think? Are we finally seeing the end of the Sussex era? Has King Charles finally agreed to do what needs to be done? And do you think William is the one pulling the strings to protect his family? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, because if this announcement drops, you know I'll be the first one here to break it down with you. We are living through history, folks, and the tea has never been hotter. Until next time, keep your eyes on the palace and your hearts with the working royals. Ta-ta, and bye for now.